So good morning, our presenters and participants. Welcome to the Virtual Vietteso International Convention 2021. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to thank you so much for your participation and contribution to our annual convention success. And we are Puna and the presentation moderators today. We are so delighted to see all of you, especially in this 60-minute workshop. And we hope that it will be a chance for all of you to gain some valuable knowledge and experience. And before the presentation, there are a few considerations. In case that you have any questions or concerns about the presentation, please feel free in either to leave them in the comment section or chat box, or you can raise your hand on the screen. And so that we can gather all the questions for easy response in the Q&A session. And please remember that the Q&A session lasts only for 5 to 10 minutes. And now, I think that it's time for all of us to welcome the presenter in the presentation, putting vocabulary to use, Miss Mary Perez. And about the presenter, I think that there are a lot of information related to her. She is a teen national program coordinator in the School of University Pathway at RMIT University in Vietnam, and she completed her MA in Texas University with a focus on discuss interdisciplinary context. And she has at least 6 years of teaching in Vietnam to a wide variety of ages and learners. And now I think that it's time for me to turn the set screen to Miss Mary. So Miss Mary, please.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me all right. And just going to share my screen so that, sorry, I'm a little bit still a novice at Zoom. Oops. I've lost the share. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So thank you for that introduction. And as Jan said, I'm Mary Perez, and thank you so much for coming to my workshop titled Putting Vocabulary to Use. And it's going to be more of a focus of not just introducing vocabulary, but seeing how we could really recycle and get the most use out of it in our lessons. So not just in one single lesson. So before we get started, I would like to get to know a little bit more about your context. So in the chat, could you write down what kind of learners you have? What issues do your students have in learning vocabulary? And what issues do you have in teaching vocabulary? So if you could just take a quick minute to do that, and you can write in the chat. If you want to share on the microphone, you can as well. Okay, so we have some adult learners. Yep, I've taught them too. Anyone else have adults or younger ones? Okay, so we have quite a few of young adults and teenagers. Yes, oh, nice specific issue of pronunciation. And yes, using the correct collocation, definitely. 70% forget, yeah. Sometimes even more. Translation, okay. Pronunciation, kids, yeah. So I'll let the others, okay, so similar too. So it seems like some of you have similar issues. I'll let anybody else who is still coming in to add your context. And while you're doing that, I'll just say a little bit about my context. So as I said, I work at RMIT University, Vietnam, where our core programs are English for University Pathways. So students who are adults getting ready to go into an English university. However, we also have a teen program where I teach mostly students from 11 to 17 years old. And with that, similar to what you have, most of my students forget, especially because we have classes only usually on the weekends. In other campuses, we have them in the evenings, but for mine, I have classes on Saturdays and Sundays for 2 hours, and Sundays like a 3-hour class. So with this, and as you know, with them going to school so much and having to take in so much, there is quite a chance that they'll forget by the next time you come in, like, what did we learn last week? And their faces are blank. Another difficulty that I had was, and I think we all had, was that for most of this year and continuing, we have been online, which has posed other challenges in seeing how we could teach vocabulary, but if they're actually learning it. Oh, nice, vocational. That's good that you have that kind of vocational skill one, because they have a specific purpose, right? To learn specific vocabulary for their training. But some of you mentioned, yes, with pronunciation and collocation, these and forgetting, these are all issues that I've had as well. So I hope that some of these activities could help address that. Learning specialized, yep, okay. Yeah, it's hard to learn specialized vocabulary when you don't have a strong foundation. And I think that's why it's so important to recycle and get them to practice their vocabulary that's taught. Okay, so another question to pose to you, and feel free to turn on your microphone if you want, or put in the chat. Just have a think, just very quickly brainstorm. What does it mean for when a student understands and learns Lexis? I mean, there's a difference between us teaching Lexis, teaching vocabulary, and the students actually understanding it. So what would you consider to be a sign that your students have learned vocabulary? Mm-hmm. Using them definitely is a good sign. Any others? Yeah, that point about accurately and fluently is a good thing to remember, right? Sometimes they might not get it very accurate, but if they are using it in extended response and they're attempting to use it and the meaning comes across, that's already a good sign too. Yes, very nice academic kind of sentence with using the vocabulary in the intended context. Yes, because we want to use the vocabulary appropriately, right? In both oral and written forms, yes. Because sometimes the registers would call for different lexes. Ah, okay, yeah, so lexis is just the more academic term for vocabulary. So in other books that talk about teaching vocabulary, sometimes you might see them titled as learning lexis or the lexical approach, because it's thinking of vocabulary words more as like a system to learn, not just words, but some words that work together. And that's kind of why I call it lexis. Yep, using vocab context, yes. So yes, meaning and form is the basis, right? And then hopefully these ones will help focus on those, but then push the students to actually use them. So I'm going to show you, this was written by Hugh Deller and Andrew Walkley, and they worked together to come up with 6 principles of learning lexis or learning vocabulary. So I'll give you a few seconds to just read through that now before I start saying it. So yes, we all know that, and as you've all said, everything that you have all written is similar to what the principles are here. So understanding the meaning of the item is the basis of it, right? And in helping with that, they need to hear and see examples of the items in context, right? Not just disconnected on a page. Approximate the sound of the item. As we know in English, a lot of the words we see, we might think that they sound one way and they sound much different, okay? And then another thing that in learning lexis, they need to pay attention to the item and notice its features, because we know that there are different word forms and changes that happen when they are actually used in sentences. So in addition to noticing all these things and being exposed to this, they also need to do something with the item, right? To use it in some way. And then lastly, repeating the steps over time when encountering them in new contexts. So the activities that I'm going to throw at you today kind of stem from this. And these are just things that maybe you can take on when you're planning your lessons and thinking, am I applying these different principles? Now, in every lesson, it's not like you have to get through all of these in every single lesson. The point with number 6 is that you're repeating these steps over time. So you're taking some of them and using them again and again to make sure that your students get a well-rounded education on the Lexis. And this list is not necessarily like in a certain order. For example, 1, yes, they have to understand the meaning, but steps 2 to 4, they can interchange depending on your context. And then I'm going to have quite a few questions for you today, but just another question for you is that in looking at reviewing these principles, can you think of activities that you use already to help students learn and use Lexis? So I'd like to get a sense and see if we could share with each other what we already do in our classrooms. Yeah, flashcards are definitely, something we'll talk about today. Kahoot's so popular with everybody, right? Yes, Wordwall, I'm going to talk about in a bit. I'm very excited about it. Quizzes, yes, Quizlet, Kahoot, great. So a lot of tech ones. We had the more traditional flashcard ones. Any others that it could be using tech, it could not be. And then we saw the unscrambling of words and letters. That's good for form matching, yes, for understanding the meaning. Okay, so yes, I think we all do similar things and I use these as well. And all the things that you listed do apply to these principles. And I think what hopefully we'll try to focus is more how we can get to more to like 4, 5, and 6 in this session. Right, so I'm going to show you techniques and activities for reviewing and getting students to produce vocabulary. And so those are going to stem from selecting the vocabulary, personalization, motivating use, recycling throughout lessons, and connecting to other contexts. And I'm pretty sure you all do this already, but I think hopefully in this session, it'll just show you some ways of how you can kind of exploit the vocabulary more. Sometimes we're so busy trying to get through each unit that we forget how we can bring the vocabulary along with us throughout the course. Okay, so the words that I'm gonna work with are from an example context of a book I've used with my class, which is the National Geographic Impact books. So in one of the units, this is for our teen pre-advanced level, and the example context is why we explore. So as you already know, when you introduce or reintroduce vocabulary, you should do it within a context, right? And you can do that with readings, listenings, discussions, and non-linguistic associations. The latter two is something I'll give examples of soon. And so if you haven't heard the term of non-linguistic associations, it's just a fancier term for something that they don't have to use language to connect with the word, but I will explain it in a moment. So in selecting vocabulary, this is a step that I think often gets missed. It seems very simple, but I think it's important to remember. So here on the left, I have all the words that were from one reading. right? So they were exposed to all those words, and we had a matching activity and check the meaning and pronunciation and form. So we've done that. But now I'm talking about another lesson where I want to review, like say the next lesson, I want to review the words. However, I'm not going to go over all of them because the review portion of the lesson shouldn't take a whole other lesson because we have other things that we need to get through. But I've selected ones on the right. So if you see, there's just a few that have been taken out. With my class, since they're pre-advanced, I usually like to keep it between like 8 to 10 words for review because it's like a manageable chunk for them. And that's something that then we can explore. It's manageable enough to explore those words further. Okay. And then why do I do this? Is because we don't want to overload students with vocabulary. As you know, in language learning, and you probably had this experience, if you're thrown so many words, it just becomes a little bit of a blur and maybe puts more pressure on to just memorize everything. We know we have students who just have long lists that they try to memorize, but I don't necessarily think that that's helpful. So when you're selecting vocabulary, I think it's important to think of the context and task that you're going to use to review. And this will help you choose what lexis to focus on. So certain words will be better in a certain context. Certain words will be better for a certain task, which we'll see in the upcoming activities. Also consider which words are high frequency. When I say, well, I'll get to that question a little bit later. So when we say high frequency words, I mean that which are the words that are more likely for the students are more likely to encounter, which are the ones that they are more likely to use, okay? So for example, if I just go back a little bit here, the thing with here, especially like high tech, investigate, achievement, engage in, those are things that they'll often probably hear in school or in the news. And it's something that will come up, especially if they're going into higher levels or going into academic context. They'll hear words like encounter, curious, engage in, and require. For example, in university, you have all these requirements that you have for your assignments. So that's a word that I think they will likely encounter. And then also in selecting vocabulary, you have to think about what would be difficult and harder for them to remember on their own too. So something like remote. I mean, generally we'd hear remote as like for the TV, but here we have it in a different sense. And that's something I do want them to focus on. The other word drive as well. We hear it for drive a car, but in more academic context that they'll be going into soon. And in this unit, there are instances of drive in other readings. And I want to make sure that they understand the meaning of that as opposed to just driving a car. Then some of these words, depending on your students, right, they might already know some of these words. So if you already see them, recognizing them and not needing a lot of time to remember it, you don't have to include those as much in your next review activities. And if a word isn't chosen right away for the next review activity, don't worry, because you have multiple lessons, so you can use them again. They're not lost. It's not a lost opportunity. You're not doing a bad job with leaving them out. Okay. So with that question that I think Sarah said, I usually like to keep it with 8 to 10 words. When it's a new reading, I usually, whatever is in the reading, I do like to expose them to all those words. But when I review, I would make it in a smaller amount. So I usually don't go over 10 for review. I'm just trying to focus on a short, manageable amount. And then the other thing with, so after you selected your vocabulary, one easy way of getting them to go from just understanding the definition and starting to connect to it is through personalization. And with personalization, that means relating it to the students, getting them to relate to their own experiences. So when I wrote non-linguistic association before, here is an example of that. So for example, on a Sunday, and I won't see them till next week, but I still want them to kind of have a connection with the vocabulary throughout the week. So my task for them for the week is to take a picture or draw at least 3 of these things. And then I have sentence prompts for them. So something you encountered in the week, an activity you have engaged in, or would like to engage in, and something high tech. And a topic or skill you would like to be an expert in. So for those, and depending on what you think they can handle, you could add more, or you could just have a few that you really want them to focus on. So remember that we also want, when we get them to review, we want it to seem manageable, because if it seems overwhelming, they're more likely not to do it so much, or just try to finish it and not really engage with it. So the words that I'm getting them to review are in bold there. And then when they come back to class, they can talk about it, they can share it with their classmates, and hopefully use the language when they're talking about it. Like, this is my high-tech device, or I would like to be an expert in. And then even if they don't, you could still ask them questions, and they're still getting exposed to hearing the word and saying the word in a context that is specific to them. So it's their personal context. And then another thing that you can do to personalize is bring in discussion. So warmers, like in the beginning of class, getting them settled in. You can have these discussions that include the vocabulary. But then if you look at the questions, they are still related to their own personal context. And the words that I am reviewing are in bold. I have some words there that are underlined as well. And that was just for me to help them get the students to notice certain collocations, like with prepositions that usually come with the words. And then hopefully other collocations like investigate, noun, right? Remote, noun. And what kind of nouns they might be associated with. So I would leave that for them to discuss. And then also in the last question, putting in the form, what drives you? So showing that the verb changes to agree with the subject, and kind of exposing that to them. I won't be going into detail like this, like as much when it's just a warmer discussion, but it is about kind of like reintroducing it and getting them to notice certain features. So you could ask a couple of questions after the discussion about the language, but it's more so to get them comfortable in remembering the meaning and using it. Okay. Okay. And I'll get to this. If I don't answer a question right now, I will come back. So please remember to post it again at the end, just because I might forget where I am, but I will come back to that with a load of words, because I understand that feeling. And some of these might help with that. So the reason for personalization is that it helps connect students to a context that's more familiar with, their experiences. And it's the same way we learned our mother tongue, right? When you're going around your world, when you were growing up, you were using the words and connecting to your experience. So in doing that, that makes it help be more meaningful for them and more purposeful. And it's connecting to the world around them. And then with these kind of activities, it makes using the word seem more achievable, because it's in an easier context. And it reinforces the meaning. And just like with the warmer discussions, it helps you scaffold. So like slowly introduce at grading the level at which you show different forms and features of the vocabulary words. Because if you just showed those words and then talked about everything all at once, they're not going to retain that information. And then lastly, helping to introduce collocations of the words. The way we build collocations is by seeing them together, right? Seeing them and using them together. So this exposure, that's why showing them in readings, in discussions, in your own words, you using them in class is really important to help them solidify those collocations. And now then, yes, we can get personal and relate to them, but then we know with our students, a lot of them could be tired or not interested, overworked. So we're gonna talk more about motivating them to use the language. And so all of you, I know that we've all a fan of online quizzes and games. And I know you know Kahoot and Quizlet and quizzes, so that's great. So I just wanted to kind of introduce quickly two other sites that might be useful that I've been using more recently. Just because if it just, you might want to have some variation, right? So if the students are only doing one kind of thing, they could also get bored, you could get bored. So just something to add to your resources to maybe help you motivate them. I'll take, is my screen still sharing? Or is it just the, are you able to see the Bamboozle site? Yeah. So great, thank you. So this has a Bamboozle, and there's many games on this already, but you can make your own. And it's quite simple to make those. So I just have the words, some of the words that I want to review here, and then you can assign points. And this is something that you could do as a whole class, where you just simply have to make your set, you have your teams, and then you can start the windows in the way. You could start it as like a game show, right? So they would have these blanks, they would pick a number, you have two teams or three. This one is free, yes. So it's free for the classic stuff. If you want the special features, then you would have to pay. But right now, like this one, I haven't paid for, and I've been able to use it quite often. So you get them to pick a number. They can work, and then sometimes it's not a great, so they have that element of risk of like, oh no, you tried, but you lost 20 points. Oops, and then they can pick another one. So they have a word, and this you can scaffold. So it could be either, can you give an example of something encountered? Can you give me a synonym? Can you use it in a sentence? Or can you give me the definition? The option is up to you. For me, I was using this to get them to try to use a definition, or I'm not definition, sorry, to give me an example or a synonym, just so I can see if they weren't just memorizing definitions, but they were kind of connecting meaning, their own meaning, making their own meaning. If they need help, you can show them the definition. And so with this, you have, you can check with them. So if they get it right, you press OK, and they get those points. If they get it wrong, they don't get them. Yes, I will later on. And just remind me if I don't, please. Okay, and then just you can go, and it's pretty easy, and you can just share your screen like I'm doing right now. And then I haven't used this as much, but they also have they have like a slideshow and study, so you can use it to present some words. You can also use it, send a link to them where they can review it on their own. And then, if you get them to, if you show them the site and they're familiar with it, you can get them to make their own sets, just like you can do in Quizlet, and then they can play the games with each other how they like, and that could be motivating for them. The other one that I'm going to show you is Wordwall. So this is limited in its free options. You only get 5 right now, but it's also if more teachers in your school start using this and you get funding for it, like I just pushed to get funding for this, for a subscription for the site, because it's not expensive. And I think a lot of Vietnamese teachers that I've seen in the community, they're already using it. So this is the one that I've been most excited about this year. Here, I'll just show you that you can do a simple matchup. So that's been helpful online. Right, so they have these different templates, and then you can have the words, and they can just, I'm not really looking, but I'm just going to match these. And then they can submit, and then you see which ones got wrong or correct. Ooh, it's good for random. But the great thing about this is that they have different themes. So if you have younger learners, you can have the clouds, or you can have a jungle. But the most fantastic thing about this is that they also have different interactive templates. So with the same set that I've used, I can also, in the next lesson, turn that into a crossword. And in this one, I can share it with the students, and then they can work together. Like you can share different links with them or you can share a link with them that they open up, and that will make a new link for them. So you could have them do it individually. If you share it, they can go in breakout groups, and one person opens the link and they can share their screen and work on it together. So they, for example, would have here, instead of the definition, I've given a sentence with a gap fill. So then they would have to type in the word. So that's practicing do they remember the spelling? Do they remember the word in general? But I've also done it where I have changed the word form that they need. So in a discussion that we had in one lesson, they were using achieve as a verb, but now they're using it. They have to think about, oh, I need to use it as a noun. And then they can, just see if they're right. And then it will tell them if they've gotten it wrong as well. Yes, you can. So I'm gonna give you guys an activity in a minute that you can hopefully do quickly, and then I'll show you how you can check the results. So if you see here, you can have it set as like a time. So you can make it like a race for the teams, like if they finish it the fastest or whoever gets the most correct, you can definitely do that. My favorite one on this is the maze chase, which I'm gonna share with you now. So I'm gonna give you a few minutes to look at this. It reminds me of a game I played as a kid. So I don't know if it'll remind you of that. So when you share it, right, you can have it anonymous. You can have them enter their name. You can give it a deadline. So for those who asked about assigning it as homework, you can have it limited. I usually don't put a deadline because if I send the students the link and they want to look at it again, so I have this option, start again. And sometimes I have leaderboard because if they see that someone's beaten them, they try to play it again so that they can get a faster or higher score. So then you can just start that, you can copy it, and I'm gonna paste it here. I'll just try to see if you can do it in 2 minutes, and then we can see who was the fastest. Go ahead, play with that. Let me know if it doesn't work. So while you guys are playing, I will move to the results page. So here I can see that, no one's finished yet. But in a couple of minutes, I'll try to check. Who may have done that. We've got one who's finished already, but not quite. Oh, is it loading? Yeah, that's the issue with these tools, is sometimes with internet connection, it's not great. Generally though, in my experience with the students, they have had issues if it's their own internet connection, but that doesn't happen too often. So I'm sorry it's happening now. But the other good thing is that if you send this and leave it as an assignment, they can come back to it when they want. And when their internet is better. Oh, okay, so we got so far, well, we've got Len as the fastest. Yeah, because you don't want to get caught by the things. And then we have some that maybe just got through but didn't answer. So it's okay if you didn't score yet. It's about just kind of like getting the fastest. But you see if you can see the number of students, the names, average score, who is the fastest, and the top score as well. So you can award your recognition to whoever you like. And I have had students that they're still waiting for the other students. And instead of just going on their phone, they try to do this again. So they're still engaging with the vocabulary. And then here, you can have like correct, incorrect, so you can check you can look at what they've gotten mostly incorrect, and you can focus your discussion on that as well. So it does help focus on the review in that sense. Okay, I'll take a look one more time before I move on. See if there's, oh, so we've got new top three, Lan, Lisa, and Amjin, very nice. So they got the highest scores, I think. And then fastest time though, still Lan. So yeah, so then you have different, and there's different activities that you can do. So if it is a younger class, like very young, you can have it where they have an anagram, so they have to switch the letters around to spell it correctly. I have another one with prepositions, collocations for my class. So they can review which prepositions go with which verbs normally. And then this other one on the right, if you can see, it's like, I wanted to do it in class. So we had like a game show kind of quiz, but you can also send it to them and they have options of like doubling their score or using 50-50 to figure out which two would be right. So yeah, so with these sites, someone mentions that we have to pay to get each one. You do have to pay to use the special features, but right now for Bamboozle and Wordwall, I haven't paid anything yet. The sad thing is that it only lets me do 5 different templates. So what I've just been using is I pick the kind of template I want, and then sometimes I change you can edit the content in it. So I could change the words. So I've used it for a different unit with different words, and then you can still change it. But even with this one activity, right, so I have it as matchup, but I could change it to random cards or a quiz, and I could play it with the class, or I could share that with the students. Some of them you can't share with the students, but a lot of them you can. Yeah, but like I said, if you can get, like, if you and your teachers are really using this, I would totally encourage you to like push for your management to see if you can subscribe to it, because I think the for the upgrades, it's not as expensive as other sites. And depending on what you're teaching, if you can see in the community, there are a lot of activities that have already been made by other teachers, and those you can use for free as well. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my PowerPoint if I can find it. So hopefully the rest of it, because it seems like you like this, which is great, and hopefully the rest won't be boring for you. But back to the PowerPoint. Let me get to the right slide. Actually, yes, okay. So I'll send those sites later on as well. And then another thing that you could do if it's low tech, right? Because we can have problems with using too much tech, but something like synonym building sentences. So this is basically like developing collocations and more meaning around the word. So I'll just show you a couple examples. Here we have a few sentences, so they have to replace with a synonym. And the synonym would hopefully get them to use a word that we've looked at in previous lessons. But then I also get them to scaffold this and get them to start using the language I've taken out the end of the sentence. So it's up to them how they want to finish it. So for the first example, like his grandparents live in a faraway, can anyone remember what, it was a word that was shown, but can you remember what word would be a synonym of like far away or accomplishment or come across? Just testing you guys now. Yes, good. Yeah, remote, exactly. So his grandparents live in a remote and then they can finish it off. Yeah, and then accomplishment, achievement. Anyone know for come across? Okay, your greatest success. Yes, so that would be good. Yes, because that's in a noun form as well. Okay. Yeah, far away dream. Yeah. Encounter, exactly. Yeah. So that gives them part of it, and then they can slowly build up to, because if you just give them the word, they might not be ready yet. So remember to scaffold it for them as you go throughout lessons. And then for this, you can make it a race, but you could also give them the time to really work with it. So if they're working in groups, you could say the most creative sentence gets the most points, right? And it's like this group gets 3 points, this one gets 2, and this one gets 1. This game is better face to face, and I think you can do it online, but hopefully when we go back to the classroom, it's a fun one, just kind of like how we have like taboo or these word guessing games. This is very similar, except it's more about really working together to get through the words, as quick as possible. And the other thing is that they have these words there. So one person, it would like backs of the board would be facing away from it, and one person is looking at the words. The good thing about this activity is that they get to choose which one they want to describe. So they get to reinforce the ones that they already have a sense, some sort of knowledge about. And along with this, I've put the specific word forms that I want them to use. So even if they say something like, oh, something you need to do, and then it's like, and the person says require, that wouldn't work because they now need to change it to the noun form. So it is kind of focusing them again on thinking about the different features of the words. And they're working together here they can use synonyms, examples, sentences, if they like even just not saying the words. So it gives them options, and it gives them more control of how they want to connect with the word. And that's like swing your partner, because once they get a word correct, then they can switch. So the person who was guessing now becomes the one who describes, and so forth. Yeah, so they can also, someone said it with abstract. Yeah. So, I mean, with high tech, that's not as much abstract, because I could say like, oh, look at my iPhone, right? My iPhone is what kind of device? So for something like, so let's say with like drive, right? That one is more abstract. So this would be something that when we reviewed and gone over the meaning, hopefully they would say something like, this is something that, this is the action where I feel pushed to do something, where I really want to do this, or I have a blank, or the wanting to help people blanks me to go out and volunteer. So if they can use it, start using it in a sentence, or give synonyms, or give examples, then that's them starting to connect, even if it is abstract. Something with like expert, if they're like, oh, this person is a blank in this field. So they're already getting the sense of what an expert means. And then with you monitoring, you can see if they're getting those contexts correct or not. And then, okay, good question, which I'll come back to that as well. Yes, I do. I definitely do, but that's why reintroducing them in different contexts and showing how they're appropriate is important. So we can talk about that in 10 minutes when I get through just remind me of the question later on, please. Because I just want to make sure I get through these two. This is another one with vocabulary bingo. So yeah, so I know how I said before is like, keep it to a manageable chunk. So here is a lot of words, but there's only a certain amount of words that I'm really trying to get them to review and produce. The other ones I have heard them say already. They're very familiar with some of the other words. So it's a mix, right? So that one is like, it's not getting them to relearn all these new things. It's building upon what I know that they know already and getting them to connect it with words that they still need more practice with. So in this one, the bingo, and basically they could write the words themselves or you can assign it. Here I've assigned it. I let them pick the word in the middle that they want to use. And it's in the beginning of the lesson and I say, okay, so you have your bingo card and our topic, I'll show you the slide, is on present and future exploration. So then since it's in a similar topic that I think they can use the words in, throughout the class, when they're giving their answers, when they're discussing in groups, they have their cards and they can look and see if they can use any of the words. If they use a word on the card, for example, like explorer, which will be easy to do, they can tick that word off. And then if they get 5 in a row at any point in the class, they can say bingo. I can ask them to say their sentences or give me new ones to check that they actually got bingo. And if it's too hard for them in that one instance, because they're not used to the activity, you can bring it into the next lesson. So this can be easier done on paper and maybe a little bit harder online, but there is also a site of my free bingo cards. So you can make your own bingo, you can put in your words. If you have a class of like 30 students, you can get these for free. And then you would just have to click on that, put in your word set, then you would give them a link. I'll put this link in for you guys. And it would generate a different card. If you had more students, it might give them the same card, but they're not always going to use it in the same way. So that's just something you can play with, and you can use it for different kind of games that you want to use to do as well. So that's just a site for, especially if you're still online and you wanted to use this, it could help you with that activity. Right, so I'm just going to actually move on to the suggested adaptations for some of these activities. So with these activities like the games and the swing your partner and vocabulary bingo, remember that they can be adapted, scaffolded for your level. So if it's a lower level, you can have just one word gap fills for the synonyms, or you can have a smaller bingo grid, maybe like a tic-tac-toe grid with 3 by 3. So it's up to you what kind of words you want to use if it's from various lessons. But remember that you want to keep it within the context of your lesson that you're teaching now, not just trying to get them to use such random words, because it'll be harder for them. If you think that you have a particular very focused topic lesson and there's words that you think they can use, and that bring that in. And then also we mentioned that collocations has been a problem, but if we look at some of these words here that I've put in, if the students think about it, they can actually get to bingo faster if they use collocations. So for example, this explorer discovered a new cave. So they can tick those off in one sentence. A researcher will have to collect data on this, so they can tick those off, and that's helping them to connect the words together as well and compete against each other, which is another thing that encourages them. So the competitive element, as we know, encourages the use of Lexis. And with every adaptation that you do, just remember that it's an opportunity to expose them to a different form, to clarify the meaning, because you can use it and say like, oh, are these words supposed to be in this context or not? It's another opportunity to practice the pronunciation and getting them to use it and looking at the different forms. So, and especially with different forms, the next thing I'm going to talk about is using it with your other lessons. Because we have, like, for example, I teach with like a reading, a speaking lesson, then a listening and grammar lesson and writing. So this is an example of using it in a grammar lesson. So I've taken the verbs that I'd introduced to them earlier on in the unit, and then
Excuse me.
Yes.
You have 5 more minutes to come up to the end of your presentation.
Thank you. So like I said, I've taken the verbs from that I had introduced to them, and we had been studying different past tense forms. So like past simple, past continuous, past perfect. So then they would have to use the verbs that they've learned before and put them into the right form. So it's another way of building upon looking at the features of form for different language. And that's just a simple gap fill. And then putting that in and connecting it into the writing. So still having a context where they can use these words and use the grammar. So it's like doubling up on the language and reviewing the vocabulary and grammar. So, but also giving them achievable things to do in the task. So use at least 3 different past forms in your sentence, use at least 4 words from the beginning of the unit. If I had them in group writing and they were going to review each other's work, so I asked them to try to use more unit vocabulary than the other groups to give a sense of competition as well. And the context was to write about someone exploring in a new land. So if you see from the other activities, they were a bit more focused and scaffolded. This one is them really getting to use it in their own way. And with the writing, then you get to see, are they using it in the right context as well? And then speaking of other contexts, when you get to another unit, don't think that the vocabulary is lost there either. So for example, in the next unit in my book, from where I taught them, it's talking about giant dinosaurs, but this is something about an archaeologist, and it's a journal entry about discovering the bones. How did it happen? How does finding these bones make you feel? So I felt like there were some words that I've taught before that they could use for this. Now, if you ask them, what did you learn from the previous unit? Again, you might get blank stares. So they might find that difficult. So support them with a list of suggestions of words that they could use in their journal entry, or refer them back to their vocab notebooks or the parts of the books where they can look at that vocabulary. And just to reiterate, like throughout the lessons, my main point is like for each lesson that you're going through, see how it could be an opportunity for you to bring the language back in, to build the synonyms. Like maybe there's in the new unit, there are synonyms to words you taught before. Show that, make the connection. Maybe there's antonyms, maybe there's collocations. Think of it as a new opportunity to build on what they've learned before. And so that for then, they can apply this to stuff like outside the classroom. So for here, I'll just quickly go over it. I have some articles here taken from different Vietnamese news sites and relating to, you know, their world. So I would show them the articles and try to get them to make predictions or questions using vocabulary they've learned before about what they think will be in the article, what they want to know from the article. And those instructions are there as well, but it's bringing it to outside. So for example, like here, we're talking about Olympiads, and in the bottom, it's about high-tech agriculture. And then what we all know about with COVID and the Green Pass, are we all going to be required to use it? Is it a requirement to enter into places? So trying to get those words used in real context, something they could relate to in real life. Okay, so we had this. I'm gonna just put this for 30 seconds because I know I'm running out of time, and I want to also have give you time for questions. But if you can look at these questions and think, these are the activities that I showed you. But do you think any of this could apply to your classes? Do they help? Would they help them learn vocabulary? Can you make any adaptations for your classes that would be more suitable for you? And then I'll go back to that, but just some tips if you don't remember anything else, because I know I talked a lot.
1 minute left. You have 1 more minute left.
Okay, so basically for your own practice, keep a record of vocabulary taught. Think about what is relevant to the students, what would be difficult, what would they need. And with this, make sure that you have a variation of activities that you use to review. Keep using new contexts and units as opportunities to review different language. Suggest listenings and readings that have those words to further expose them. And make sure that your productive tasks are not just to kind of like test them, but make sure it's something that where they can connect it to their own experience or something in the classroom, because we are teaching vocabulary to use, not just
Okay, Miss Mary, I think that
Mhm.
we can come to the Q&A session because
Yeah.
we don't have enough time, right? Okay, so can you turn up your slide set? Right.
Let me just. Oop.
Okay, so I have some questions that I got from the participant here, and that I can show to all of you. So can you see my slide?
Mhm.
Yes. And that is the first question. Are the apps available on the mobile phone?
Are the apps available on the mobile phone, on
The Bamboo and I think that the Wordwall. I
the
think
website? Yeah, you can, because they're just sites, they're not apps themselves. So you should, if they use their internet browser, they should be able to use them.
yes, and that is the second question that I got from the participant. If language teachers are assigned to teach with a huge lot of new words, maybe 30 to 40 in the short term before examination. So could you please share some tips to overcome this? Because their class size is about 30 to 40 students.
Mhm. Yeah, so with these, that's why when you have you have a lot of new words, right? When you're reviewing them, because otherwise they're still gonna forget all of them. But try to, if you have like 30 to 40, try to keep them in like and group them into what would be more appropriate context. So think about those words and think, oh, these would be more likely to be used together. Review them in the next lesson. And then for the next one, use a different set of words to focus on to review that are more connected to each other. So you might have to categorize those words more to make the connections seem more solid for them. And then you can use sites like this, like the ones I showed you, or assignments like I showed, give them as assignments for them to review throughout the week. And then the sites that I've shown, like with Wordwall, they can access that at home. You can resend it to them the next day with as a different activity, so they can practice again in a different way. And that might help you get through those.
Yes, I still got another questions from our participant, right? So that one may be related to the terminology. Could you please let me know which ways are the most effective ways to teach and learn?
I'm not sure what this means exactly. Is it with teaching?
I
I'm
mean,
not
that
sure.
terminology may be related to the ESP cards. I'm not sure.
Right, because if you're teaching with your students, you don't need to say Lexis like I have. You could just say vocabulary. Maybe I would just say, remember to think of the context of your students. What is the purpose of them learning this vocabulary? Because that will help with your selection. Think about when you use those words, how do you use it? Do you use it mostly by seeing something? Do you use it mostly in talking with someone in a conversation? You have to think about the way that it's used, and that will lead you to how to introduce it or how to go over it, because just matching definitions and words is not enough.
Yes, and we got the last questions here. So do you have any difficulty in explaining complicated words, and how can we do that? Yes, sir, please.
Right. Okay. So in this one, especially like cultural terms, yeah, because we have different ones. This one I think is best through anecdote, like examples and experiences. So if I have a complicated term, I would give the situation, like a short story of what's happening, and with the people involved, and then present that. And then I would ask them concept check questions like, oh, is this real? Like if it was an idiom, like, is it really raining cats and dogs? No. Is it raining a little bit? No. Is it raining a lot? Yes. So that they can kind of understand that it's not actually raining cats and dogs. And I don't speak Vietnamese, so I wouldn't be able to translate it for them. And I show them examples of how Google Translate can actually confuse you more so. But yeah.
Yes, okay. So thank you so much for your so
Mhm.
wonderful and informative slide share. And I think that all of us will enjoy this wonderful moment by turning on your camera so that we can take the photos, because the session will be going to end right now. So please turn on your camera so that I can take the photos with all of you in this session. So thank you very much for your participation and checking in this session. So can you give our heart shape or maybe the reaction, right? Yeah, so please. Yes, I can get the camera continuously, right?
Thank you. Yeah. I'm trying to add the document here of the slides, but if you want to contact me, you can email me at this one and I'll try to add. Or now, is it, if I send it to you, are you able to send it
Yes.
to them?
Yes,
Okay.
okay. So I
Okay.
think that maybe we can get the email.
Yes, sorry, I accidentally sent it to only one person. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm trying to attach, just oddly not showing up.
So